He is gone. The command center is quiet and impossible to believe. What did the officers do when their leader fell and the maps slid from certainty into ash? April 30, 1945, Berlin bunker rooms smell of smoke and bile. General Reinhart Weber, Colonel Matthias Krug, Admiral Ernst Vogel. 3 officers, 3 confessions, 1 pattern that rewrites the final night. What they admit next will change how we read the collapse. Now let us move into the first room. The corridor to the lower bunker is narrow and hot. Light bulbs buzz. Concrete tastes metallic on the tongue if you have been crouched there for hours. The first scene opens with a radio clacking out static, boots scraping on steel, and the distant thud of explosions. A lantern throws a sickly yellow across maps that are damp with sweat. Weber sits at a scarred table, rubbing his jaw where a shaving cut refused to close. Captain Lenz stands rigid by the door. Sergeant Bauer watches the map with fingers that tremble. The air smells of burnt paper, coffee, and the faint chemical sting of antiseptic. Weber had been a staff officer for 20 years, a man who wrote logistics memos and learned to read faces. He had never imagined dialing the enemy. Weber picks up a field telephone. The cord creaks. He listens. He speaks in a voice that is at once precise and hollow. "This line is open," says Weber. Lenz leans forward, hands clasped. "Who do you mean to call?" asks Lenz quietly. "The other side," Weber answers. "We have no code for that," Bauer says. "There is a code for survival," replies Weber. "You would commit treason," Lenz says, looking at his superior. "Or bend the rules to save people," Weber shoots back. "How will you explain this to the council?" Bauer demands. "I will not explain," Weber says, and breathes heavily. Then dials. The phone is a small click in a room full of thunder. On the other end, a voice is muffled through static. Weber repeats words slowly, and then, in the crucial exchange, says, "We want to discuss a ceasefire for civilians." Lenz closes his eyes. The map blurs. Their conversation spans 6 exchanges, precise, curt, and inevitable, each line clinging to the next like splinters. Sound in the room becomes the ticking of a pocket watch and the rustle of paper. Weber tastes copper, thinking of lost sons, of scorched towns. The result of the call is a document scribbled by hand, later classified and filed by archivist Mueller, who wrote in the margin a note that would not be seen for decades. The first confession asserts that an unofficial call to the enemy saved a corridor for civilians, but condemned several commanders to accusation of betrayal. If this first admission shocks you, you are not alone. Take a moment to write what you feel. Which confession so far seems to cut the deepest? A, B, or C? And why? Your comment helps. Others decide what to investigate next and guides our research. We read your responses and use them to shape interviews and archive requests. So leave a single letter and 1 short line explaining your choice. It only takes a moment, and it matters to the story of those who lived through the last nights. Your voice becomes part of the record. Now return and listen to the next confession that forces a courtroom to confront duty and silence. The second scene moves to a temporary tribunal in a schoolhouse, repurposed for hearings. Light is harsher here. The smell of chalk and boiled cabbage hangs in the air. Colonel Matthias Krug sits on a wooden chair, his uniform buttoned too tight, sweat at his collar. Dr. Fisher, a historian turned interrogator, asks precise questions. Major Hoffman watches from a corner. Lieutenant Krauss records every syllable. The sensory detail is sharp, the clack of a fountain pen, the rasp of a chair leg on rough floor, the taste of cheap tobacco in the mouth of an official. Krug had planned offensives. He had signed orders. He had visited front lines. He understood artillery and timing. In his backstory, Krug trained younger officers, including Captain Lenz, and had been known for a white-knuckle resolve that often masked private doubts. The interrogation expands into 7 exchanges that reveal tone and intent and small human reactions. "Did you know the leader was unstable?" asks Dr. Fisher. "We all knew," Krug replies flat. "You mean everyone understood the situation?" presses Dr. Fisher. "Officers spoke among themselves," Krug says and rubs his forehead. "Why did you not act earlier?" asks Major Hoffman. "Because institutional momentum carried us," Krug answers. "Institutional momentum or fear?" Krauss counters. "Both," Krug admits, then pauses, the silence heavy like wet wool. "Did you sign orders you now regret?" Dr. Fisher asks. "Yes," Krug says simply. "Do you feel responsible?" Hoffman asks, leaning in. "I do," Krug says, and his voice breaks once. Each line is a micro-reaction, a throat clearing, a hand finding a ring, the shuffle of feet. The room registers the confession as admission that chain of command remained intact, even when its premise collapsed, and that many officials chose order over interruption. The tribunal records the phrase, "we all knew," in its minutes, and that sentence circulates to other hearings and to the families of those who died. The third confession unfolds later in a naval office overlooking a harbor, where smoke still rises. Admiral Ernst Vogel is older than his rank and smells faintly of pipe tobacco and seawater. Anna Weiss, his estranged sister, visits with a bundle of letters she preserved. Colonel Brandt, who served under Vogel, is present, as is Archivist Mueller, again noting file numbers. The scene is tactile. The deck boards creak. The tang of salt is thick on the tongue. The breeze carries distant horns and the scratches of gulls. Vogel speaks of an order he received and then signed that instructed the demolition of port facilities to deny their use to the advancing forces. His backstory is concise. He had commanded supply lines and believed in scorched earth as doctrine in desperate times. The conversation between Vogel, Brandt, and Hoffman is 5 exchanges and builds like a slow fracture. "You authorized destruction?" Brandt says. "I signed an order drawn by counsel," Vogel answers. "Was there discussion of civilian cost?" Hoffman asks. "There was talk, but no halt," Vogel admits. "Did you consider sabotage as prevention or revenge?" Brandt presses. "Prevention," Vogel insists, and then, in a quieter voice, "perhaps revenge mixed with duty." The words land like metal on stone. Lieutenant Krauss touches the papers nervously, the ink odor sharp and new. The confession reveals that orders were framed as strategic, yet carried a moral calculus, that officers deferred to other officers and to the momentum of war. These 3 confessions converge into a pattern of choices that are recorded as documents and then classified as sensitive. A sealed file held by Archivist Mueller, labeled Classified Number 47, notes the conversations and attributes responsibility in a way that made prosecutors pause. Interviews years later with Dr. Fisher, Professor Anna Weiss, and Major Hoffman show recurring themes: fear of breakdown, duty to chain of command, and a belief that limited violations could save larger numbers. Secondary witnesses, Captain Lenz, Sergeant Bauer, Colonel Brandt, Lieutenant Krauss, Archivist Mueller, and Anna Weiss, each remembered different scenes, small physical details that corroborated the confessions. The shabby phone, the tremor in a hand, the smell of burnt paper. Historians now debate the legacy. Some argue the calls and orders were pragmatic attempts to reduce civilian suffering. Others say they were convenience cloaked as mercy. Investigations opened in the 1950s and again in the 1990s when newly available documents forced re-evaluation. The consequence, practical, was mixed. Corridors were opened, ports were delayed, but reputations were stained. Responsibility settled unevenly. Courts hesitated to convict where intent was murky. The moral assessment remained contested. Months later, several officers faced administrative censure. Some retired quietly, others chose exile. Dr. Fisher published a study that cited the classified file and triggered a new round of inquiry. Anna Weiss donated letters to the National Archives, and archivist Mueller cataloged them under a new reference that made scholars take notice. The epilogue is stark and specific. 3 years after the fall, a parliamentary committee recommended clearer rules for emergency negotiations, a directive that changed military legal practice and that is still taught in staff colleges. The confessions did not absolve or condemn neatly. They complicated the picture. In closing, these admissions are not simple remorse, nor clean heroics. They are the quiet choices of men and women who navigated orders and conscience where the maps ended and the real world burned. The documents, the tribunal transcripts, the sealed file, and the handwritten margin notes remain as evidence that when command fractures, people respond in ways that ripple through institutions and into law.
If you want more episodes like this, subscribe to follow our investigations and help decide which archived file we open next. The last line from one marginal note reads simply, and forever disturbingly, "We acted to save some and thus doomed others." And that sentence will stay with you.